Do you know what a subcontinent is? You don't? Well, you better watch this video. So today we're going to be talking about the world's subcontinent. Now if you know what a continent is, that's like a major land mass. There's 7 continents in the world. Alright, today we're going to talk about the subcontinent, and that subcontinent is the country of India. India has an incredibly diverse history. We can't cover all the ins and outs and intricacies of it here in this video. We're just going to be taking another overview. However, the subcontinent of India is incredibly diverse, and it's incredibly diverse in its topography. Topography is a fancy word that means the physical features of the land that you're studying. And India's topography, like I said, is incredibly diverse. You've got coastal plains, you've got mountains, you've got valleys, you've got tropical regions and rainforests, you've got jungles, you've got beaches. Everything you could imagine is in the Indian subcontinent. Also, 1 billion plus people live in the Indian subcontinent. Man, this is a pretty crazy place. Let's get into its geography and a little bit into its history. All right, if you look at the map that's on the screen right now, you'll see that India is a peninsula. A peninsula is any piece of land that's surrounded on 3 sides by water. As you can see here, you have the Arabian Sea to the west, you have the Bay of Bengal to the east, and then south on the triangular tip of India, you see it leads into what's known as the Indian Ocean. And this is where the topography of India comes into play big time. It's surrounded by water on 3 sides, and then on the northern side you'll see that's capped off by mountain ranges. To the northeast you have the Himalayas, which is the highest mountain range in the world, and then the northwest you have some other mountains that make it very difficult for any group of people to access the interior of the Indian Peninsula. In fact, if you look at the map, the only way you can really easily access this area by land is through the Khyber Pass in between the mountains in the northwest part of India. So the culture and civilizations that live in India at this time have the luxury of growing pretty much without any outside influence and without any outside interference from the world around them. Let's look at a few of those early civilizations. The early civilizations of India were found in the Indus River Valley. Again, if you look at the map, the Indus River is on the northwestern part of the Indian Peninsula. And in that river valley, you have some incredibly lush, some incredibly desirable land where 2 major civilizations pop up in this river valley. The first one is centered around the city of Mohenjo-Daro, and the second one is centered around the city of Harappa. And these cities and their civilizations were a testament to the advancement of the people at this time. We're talking 1500 BC. This is 1,000 years before the Roman Republic is established. We have cities with multiple storied buildings, cities with indoor plumbing. In fact, archaeologists who have studied the Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa cities here in the Indus River Valley have surmised that the people who lived in these cities had a better quality of life than many people who live in Indian villages today. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were also incredibly advanced in that they likely traded with many people in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean. This civilization really was more advanced than its time. However, these civilizations were eventually conquered by a group of people from Central Asia. Those people are called the Aryans, and the Aryans came in likely through the Khyber Pass, and they conquered and took over the entire Indian subcontinent, and much of their culture is what we would associate with Indian culture today. And as the Aryans conquered and took over the land here in India, they didn't really build any major cities like Mohenjo-Daro or like Harappa. Most of their life was centered around village life. It wasn't their cities or their archaeological evidence that really gives us a true insight into what it was like under the Aryans in Indian history. What gives us the biggest insight into the Indian culture and way of life at this time is a group of religious texts written by the Aryans known as the Vedas. And the Vedas give us insight into 3 things that made the Aryan civilization and the Aryan culture very similar to Indian culture today. The first is the joint family system, the joint family structure. Basically, you would live with the oldest male member of your family. You'd have obviously a grandfather, and then you would have his children, his children's families, all living together, sometimes in the same house and very often on the same property. They would arrange marriages. They would do all kinds of different things. So you didn't do anything without the family's permission. You would consider your family first before you made any private decisions. It was a very distinct way of life that developed here under the Aryans in India. The next thing that we see here from the Vedas and from Aryan culture, is village life was incredibly important. Most of the Indian people lived in villages. Major cities were not built. Village structure and joint families were very important. The final thing that we see in the Vedas that was very important to Aryan and eventually Indian culture was the caste system. The caste system was a very rigid, very strict social order that develops here in India at the time. The caste system was made up of thousands of different castes and subcastes, and they're basically just societal levels that you belong to or don't belong to. The highest level would be the Brahmins. Those are the priests here in the religion that we'll talk about here in a minute. After that, you have like your people with power, your warriors, your political leaders, your rulers. After that, you have the servants. They're called the Sudras, and if you had any sort of service job, you lived in that caste. And finally, in the caste system, you had your untouchables, or as we would call them here in English, your outcasts. And these people were pretty much despised. They were not associated with. The teachings of the time actually believed that you were corrupted if you associated with someone from outside of your caste, or with an outcast, an untouchable as well. And so this was how the social structure in India worked. A lot of this is recorded in the Vedas that comes from the Aryan culture. Eventually, we have this religion that develops out of Aryan culture, and this religion is known as Hinduism. Hinduism is a polytheistic religion with thousands, some even say millions of gods. However, there is a belief in Brahman, which is the universal God, the great spirit that exists all throughout the universe. And Hinduism is focused around the belief of reincarnation, is a belief in a cycle of rebirths that every soul goes through. You can be born again as any sort of living thing, and you do this however long is necessary before you are reunited with the world soul of Brahman and cease to be reborn. And so eventually you want your reincarnation cycle to end, and this is obviously a very basic explanation of what Hinduism is, but this develops in the time of the Aryans and has a huge impact on Indian culture as well. As you can see, Indian culture and the Hindu religion are very intertwined, and really this is the only religion in India for the longest time, until it is challenged by a man called Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama eventually takes on the term Buddha, which means the enlightened one, and he develops, you guessed it, the religion of Buddhism. The religion of Buddhism is found around 500 BC. This is pretty much the same time that the Roman Republic is being established. You have Buddhism coming to play here in India. Hinduism has already been a main religion in Indian culture for some time now, and the religion of Buddhism is centered around what Gautama called the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths were as follows. The first one teaches that suffering is a part of human existence. We all suffer. The second one is key because it states that the reason why we suffer is because of our own selfish desires. The third noble truth teaches that if we destroy our selfish desires, we can eliminate and destroy all suffering in our life. And then the fourth noble truth is that following the Eightfold Path, which was the moral code that was developed by Gautama, the Buddha, and if you follow this Eightfold Path, you can learn to destroy your own desires. To contrast Buddhism with Christianity, you see here how in Buddhism, all right, it is up to the person to destroy their own desires, and that's the reason why we suffer. Whereas in Christianity, we believe that the reason that there is suffering is because of human sin. And the only answer to the sin and the suffering that it causes is not found within ourselves, it's found in the person and work of Jesus Christ. So as you can see, this religion of Buddhism does not stack up very well against Christianity, and it's actually at odds with its fundamental teachings. All Buddhists are eventually hoping to reach a stage of nirvana, which is the escape of suffering from this life achieved by destroying your own selfish desires. And the religion of Buddhism is going to last in India and eventually all throughout Southeast Asia here in the future. The Aryan influence in India continues on for many years, even to this day. However, the actual people group loses power in India well before Alexander the Great. And then if you remember, Alexander the Great comes in and conquers many parts of India. After Alexander the Great and the Greeks leave India, a man by the name of Chandragupta Maurya comes to power, and he unites many of these little tribes and these weak kingdoms that were left behind after Alexander the Great's conquest. And Chandragupta Maurya develops what is known in history as the Mauryan Empire. Chandragupta's grandson Asoka becomes the greatest Mauryan leader during the Mauryan Empire, and Asoka is influential because he basically makes Buddhism the official religion of the Mauryan Empire, and this is at odds with the Hindu teachings. Asoka spreads Buddhism throughout the Indian peninsula, throughout his empire, and that is probably the key and lasting result of the Mauryans. The Mauryan Empire eventually collapses, and for some time in between, India's small kingdoms until they're united again under the Gupta Empire. Many historians recognize the Gupta Empire in Indian history as the most economically prosperous, the most peaceful, and the most progressive time in ancient Indian history. It was during this time they had a strong, united government. You had economic prosperity. A lot of things were going well for the Guptas. They make great strides in art and architecture. They make great strides in literature as well through the writings of people like Kalidasa with his poems and plays. He's remembered as the Shakespeare of India. In fact, later Western writers would look to Indian literature for inspiration generation and develop their own tales from them. The Gupta Empire was a huge time of prosperity for the Indian people. Eventually though, like many empires, the Gupta Empire falls. You have people like the Huns and then later Muslim conquerors come into the Indian subcontinent, and we won't pick up back with them for quite some time. However, you have a pretty good idea of how the Indian subcontinent developed its culture, why it was able to develop in isolation because of its topography, because of its geography, and we'll talk a little bit more about India down the road here in world history. One thing you can do right now, though, is you could like this video and you could subscribe to Kingdom Lyceum. You could even turn on notifications. Be always learning. See you next time.